it's been a great sort of homework assignment for me, probably one of the best ones I've had, to be able to go back to prepare for this Q&A and see revisit some of the great films of the last several decades. And so just to quickly run through a few of those that Lawrence Kasdan's written and directed, and that I had the fun of revisiting. Raiders of the Lost, written or directed. I just want to emphasize these are many cases both. But Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Empire Strikes Back, The Return of the Jedi, Body Heat, Silverado, The Accidental Tourist, Grand Canyon, The Bodyguard, Wyatt Earp, and of course the film that we've just seen, which is on any list of people's greatest or favorite films of the 80s and beyond that. The other thing that makes today particularly special is that we're going to be joined not only by Lawrence Kasdan, but by the person, the great actor who has starred in more of his films than anyone else, 6 over the last 29 years. He is someone that is, I know a close friend of Lawrence Kasdan's, and so it's going to be a great opportunity for all of us to get an extra sort of perspective on many of the films that we're talking about. So please join me. I'm very excited to be able to welcome to the Santa Barbara International Film Festival both Oscar winner Kevin Kline and Lawrence Kasdan. So the first thing I just have to say, when I was preparing this, I was thinking, Kasdan and Kline, it sounds like a law firm almost. But again, over the last 29 years, 6 films, which I just want to quickly run off. First of all, The Big Chill, but then also Silverado, I Love You to Death, Grand Canyon, French Kiss, and now, after 17 years, Darling Companion, which many of us I know saw last night. How did you two first cross paths, and why do you think you hit it off to the extent that you obviously did?
Yeah, well, I can answer that. The movie my first directing was Body Heat, and when it was casting in 1980, and we made it in 1981, and it was the most incredible time for actors in America, and it was just, everybody was exploding in Los Angeles and Hollywood and in New York. The New York scene was incredible, and for a young director making his first film, it was amazing. I could seeing great people on both coasts and going back and forth. And when I came to New York, I met Kevin, and I met Bill Hurt and John Hurt and Chris Walken, and everybody. It was a huge group of people, and Kevin, I thought he was amazing, but I chose Bill. He's a little more amazing, I guess. But Kevin had already won a Tony. I think he was about to win his second Tony. He was a phenomenon, and I could see that he could do almost anything, but for that picture, I went with Bill. But meeting Kevin had made a huge impression on me, and I thought, well, that's the guy I want to work with. And in fact, working on Body Heat, where it was Bill and Kathleen Turner, and essentially and Ted Danson, and it was really Bill and Kathleen all the time, very intense shoot, mostly at night, and I had a great time making the film. I couldn't have been more excited about directing, and it was really a wonderful experience. But one of the things that occurred to me during it was that the next thing I was going to write, I wanted a lot of actors. It was just a little too claustrophobic, a little too intense, being with just the two of them all the time. And so I said, I'm going to write a movie with a lot of leads in it. And Barbara Bennett and I wrote The Big Chill, and set about casting 7 leads in that, and plus the guy that got cut out. But for that, I again went into this enormous pool of actors, and we did a reading in Los Angeles and a reading in New York, so we had full casts on both coasts, and it filled up with wonderful people in all the parts. So we had 2 separate casts, and final cast wound up being a mix of those two groups, and immediately asked Kevin to come in and be part of that, and knew almost immediately that I wanted him to be at the center of this circle.
A question for Kevin. I mean, if I look again just at some of the casts of all these films that you've been a part of, and one thing, you're the ultimate example, 6 times working with him, but I think that, no, it's fine, it's not.
What is it?
That was just the recorder.
Okay.
But we have backups.
All right.
But William Hurt on 4, Danny Glover on 2, Jeff Goldblum on 2, and then on the other side of the camera, James Newton Howard on 6, your wife, of course, on I think, as many as anyone in her various capacities. What is it that keeps people wanting to work with him? He's obviously, gets great performances out of actors.
Let me give my side of the story of our first meeting quickly, because I went in, I'm not apologizing, and I have no excuses for that audition. And I think you made the right decision, ultimately. No, I'm kidding. I had remembered Larry, because it was the first, I was just sort of starting out, but when I met him, I just liked him. And his wife was with him. I'd never gone to a meeting with a director who brought his wife. It was unusual, and he was this guy, and we could talk. And I just, and then I've made him feel so guilty about not casting me that he's still not over, so he's going to have to keep recasting. So he's over that guilt.
To put the Big Chill in some perspective, and then I do want to talk about some of the other films, but just since this is the freshest on everyone's mind, I think people may not necessarily remember how tremendously received it was. I mean, we all remember it was very well received, but just here's the extent. Won the Audience Award at the Toronto International Film Festival. Lawrence Barbara Benedek won the WGA Award. Lawrence garnered DGA Award nomination, Directors Guild. Golden Globe nomination for Screenplay and Best Picture, Musical or Comedy. Academy Award nomination for Glenn Close. Lawrence and Barbara for Best Original Screenplay, and the film for Best Picture. And it's $56 million that it made then, if adjusted for inflation, would be $125 million today. So, so did you have any sense when you both started on this that it was going to be that kind of a hit?
No, absolutely not. And Body Heat had done modestly well, to put me in position to, people wanted to work with me after that. And then when I brought them The Big Chill, no one wanted to do it. They were offering me other pictures, and they liked Body Heat a lot, but when they saw The Big Chill, they said, there are 7 leads, we don't understand that. How can that work? That's not how we do things. Who are you supposed to invest in? What's the focus of the movie? And I've actually pitched the movie 16 times, and this was when I had finally gotten, I thought, hot, and turned out not so hot. And but through a series of odd circumstances, a wonderful woman named Marcia Nassiter had was working for Johnny Carson. He was in the movie business for about 10 minutes, and he had made a deal with Columbia where they had to make a picture under a certain price. And Marcia Nassiter, who was an old lefty and really identified with these characters, even though she was a couple generations ahead, insisted that Columbia Pictures make this movie, and otherwise they would never have done it. And in fact, Frank Price, who was the head of Columbia at that time, when we'd gone through the whole process, he didn't want to make the movie, and he saw it, and at the studio it was like that, and we went to a preview, and the place went crazy. And we had an incredible preview in Seattle. And Frank Price came out and he said, I had no idea this was a comedy. But I thought that was, I did not blame him for that, because I thought that the one strength the movie had was that it spoke this language that maybe some other people had not, they didn't speak. And it wasn't that I knew it alone, but that people were not writing movies in that language. And there's never a moment, I think, when you have to, when we got the cast together, we rehearsed for a month, no one ever said, I don't understand why they talk like that, because everyone understood that these were issues that, you didn't need much reference and background. So for Frank Price, who at that time was, 30 years older, I didn't blame him for not sort of getting that part of it. So it was hard to get the movie made, but then when we got it made, Meg and I and my wife, opening night, very downbeat. Who was going to be interested in this besides our friends? And we had heard that the opening was soft the afternoon, and we went to dinner with Michael Shamberg, who produced the movie, and he was late. He came in, he said, "You see what's happening?" And we said, "What?" "Yeah, the movie's not doing that well." And he said, "No, there's a line around the block at the Avco in Westwood." And that was the first indication we had that things were going to go well.
And the same from your perspective. I mean, was there a sense that, even if forget how it would be received by the public, but that it was of a caliber that was really special? Did that wasn't even necessarily clear until later on?
No, I still don't. It's not clear yet. Because I'm just an actor, but I remember the experience of making it, and we had great fun and great camaraderie and all that. But no, when I first saw the movie, when Larry first screened it for a handful of us, I just kept rocking in my seat. I thought, this music is great. and it's a lovely kind of home movie of that wonderful 6 or 9 weeks that we spent making it. But whether anyone's going to, it never even occurred to me that people would come and see it.
And I think what people may not know is that there was actually quite a bit of, I don't know if you would call it autobiographical or semi-autobiographical, but there's a lot of overlap between things that happen in the film and people and your own experiences. Can you share some of that?
Well, we did, Meg and I met at the University of Michigan, Meg's back there, and we had a circle of friends that stayed with us through these. So we had graduated in 1970, and I was making this picture in 1982. And for those 12 years, those friends had stayed very tight. We were very dependent on the friendships we made in college. And a lot of them were going through difficulties as, the college experience, despite the threat of the draft, and everybody had a draft number and everybody was worried about it, and some people went. And despite all of that, they had gone out into while we were in college, it was a cocoon. It was, as Kurt Vonnegut actually said, that I went to a lecture at the University of Michigan, and he looked out at us and he said, "You guys have the cushiest berth in the world," which I stole and put in the movie. And it was just great. Everything was changing. The world was turning upside down while we were there. At the University of Michigan, where SDS was formed and where the Weathermen started, it was an amazing time to be in college. And so very exciting, and you thought, and then we protested the war, and all of us had been involved in that in March, and the war ended eventually, and we thought, oh, well, we did that, And obviously it was very motivated by self-interest, and, I'm sure if there were a draft today, we wouldn't have had one war after another like we do, because it takes, the middle class has to be threatened in order to stop these things. But when the middle class is not threatened, but at that time they were, and so we had this completely distorted view of our power. And when we went out into the world and tried to find careers and work, we found it was much more difficult, that the world was a cold place and that it was not going to bend to our will. And so I told Barbara I wanted to write a movie about that surprise.
I have read that you are a big Kurosawa fan for your whole life, and to me, maybe this is overanalyzing it, but I mean, there's sort of a bit of Rashomon and Citizen Kane in this, where it's people looking at somebody the life of somebody who's recently died, trying to figure out what's piece together the answers that nobody will necessarily know. Was there any, aside from your own experiences, were those or any other films or things outside influences on this film for you?
For me, the movie that affected this movie the most, and it's not so easy to see, is Rules of the Game, which is the greatest country house movie ever made, and which is about sort of everything in the world and encompasses everything. And this is not like that exactly, and it's certainly not. It's a pale shadow of that, which is one of the greatest films ever made. But that idea of a group of people in a country house, isolated for a limited amount of time, that's a very attractive structure for me. And I think you could talk about a lot of things. So it was very much influenced by that. Kurosawa influenced everything I do, but because he made movies about everything there is, and over the course of his 27 movies, you'll see very intimate dramas, and you'll see relationship, and you'll see very funny comedy, and of course the best action movies ever made, and the best historical movies ever made. So he was an influence in the sense that he believed that the smallest things of human behavior are worth the full treatment of a movie, and it can be of any scale.
Kevin, I wanted to ask you that I see that there were weeks and weeks of the cast in advance of the film living together in the house, or maybe not weeks of living, but a while of living in the house. Is part of that? No?
No living in the house.
For anyone? Nobody?
No, but there's a part of the movie that got cut out, and it was the first idea, and this has proven true for 30 years, which is the first great idea I have for any movie eventually gets cut out of the movie. And the first great idea I had for this movie was that we would see this movie that you just saw, and at the end of it, in the kitchen, Glenn would go back to washing the pots, and we would move in on her, and we would cut flashback to Thanksgiving in Ann Arbor, 12 years earlier, and you would see Alex, who you never do see in the movie, and it would be Thanksgiving dinner, Thanksgiving 1970 or 68 or something, and it would be all about the preparation of the meal, and Alex given the responsibility of cutting the turkey, and he's there, and that character was played by Kevin Kline. And all this thing that is that you hear during this movie about what the relationships were and who loved Alex and who didn't love Alex, it's all sort of illuminated by this flashback. So we did, in fact, the rehearsal period was extraordinary in that we rehearsed for 4 weeks. That never happens in the movies, and now there's barely any rehearsals. The economics are all against it, but here everybody committed 4 weeks. We rehearsed for a couple weeks in LA. We went to Atlanta where we were going to shoot this flashback of Ann Arbor in 1960. And there was a house that it was set in, and there were several nights during that period when the cast stayed there and kicked me out and said, we're going to make meals, we're going to talk, we don't need your opinion about it.
I guess that's, yeah. In addition to Kevin Costner, there was another person who didn't make it into the film but has remained a part of your life, and I wonder if you can fill in that blank.
At the reading in New York, there were a lot of the people that you see in the film, but my wife, Phoebe Cates, read the part that Meg Tilly ended up playing. She had just finished, I think, her first movie, and I think you had seen it and asked her to do this reading. And I remember seeing her there, but no big deal.
He claims that it was no big deal, that he didn't get her number, that they never talked after that.
No, it was years later.
Next thing, the way I heard you tell it is, next time they met was at their wedding.
But that was the first time you two.
That was the first time we'd met. But really, I met her again. I don't know, 5 years later. She was doing a play at the New York Shakespeare Festival, and I was doing a play in another theater at the New York Shakespeare Festival. And we met in the hallway.
And Phoebe would have been in the movie. As I say, both these casts were wonderful, and you could have gone with either one of them. And in fact, we wound up with a mixture of them. But if Meg Tilly hadn't done the movie, then Phoebe Cates would have played that part.
I never would have been married.
You would have gotten it out of her system right then.
Right. Okay, so at this point, messing with the chronology a little bit, I want to go back and ask you, you come out of University of Michigan, and you get into advertising.
Yeah.
How does that lead you out to Hollywood and starting on, submitting scripts and stuff, and ultimately to George Lucas?
Well, in 19... when I was 14 years old, 1963,
Right.
to 1962, I saw Lawrence Kasdan. And I knew right then that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to write and direct movies, and that became my focus from that time on. And I lived in West Virginia, and I went to the University of Michigan. All that time I was thinking, how am I going to get to be a movie director? And once I got to Michigan, I started writing screenplays, and I kept entering this writing contest, and that sort of put me through school. And the idea was, if I could, there were a lot of young writers who were becoming directors in the 70s, and that was Francis Coppola and Paul Schrader, and that seemed like a way for me to go. So I thought, if I could just become a hot screenwriter, then maybe I'll get to direct. And so I was writing screenplays all through college, but I went out to, after college, I went to UCLA for a few weeks, didn't like it very much, and went back to Ann Arbor and worked in a record store. And I thought, well, this is, and I was writing screenplays still, and then I thought, I'll get a teaching degree, because then I'll teach high school English, and I'll be free 3 months a year to write these screenplays. And it was much harder to get an English teaching job, high school English teaching job at that time, which was during the war, than to become a movie director. I should have chosen that. But I couldn't get a job, and a friend of Meg's worked in advertising and said, you know, why don't you show me your stuff? And I wound up working in advertising for 5 years. I was grateful that he offered it to me, but I really despised the work. And I worked for 3 years in Detroit, and then I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to get closer to the movies, and I got a job with Doyle Dane Bernbach in Los Angeles. I worked there for 2 more years all the time. I'm writing these screenplays, and then all of a sudden they started selling. It took 7 years, sort of, since after doing it, but one sold, and then another one sold really quickly, and that second one led me to Steven Spielberg, and he said, George Lucas and I are going to do a movie and about a guy with a whip and a hat, and we want you to write it. And I said, okay. And that led me to Raiders, and so when it finally broke, everything happened sort of quickly, and 3 years later I was director.
And before, though, the first directing job, Body Heat, you did Empire Strikes Back before that, and then came back and did Return of the Jedi, sort of as I gathered that it was almost as a favor, because you seemed not that interested in doing sequels. Is that right?
I didn't, but George Lucas had been very helpful to me in my career, and in fact, more so than just giving me Raiders to write and then Empire immediately after that. What he did was much bigger than that, which was that then people were offering me a lot of writing jobs. I said, no, I'm not writing for anybody anymore. I'm going to direct. And Alan Ladd Jr., who was running 20th Century Fox, said, well, what is it you want to direct? And I told him the story of Body Heat. And he said, well, if you can get George Lucas to sponsor you, I will, make that deal. I won't say I'll make the movie, but you can write the script. And I said to George, will you be the executive producer of Body Heat? And he said, well, I'm starting Lucasfilm, and we make family films, and I cannot make Body Heat. It's just filthy. And he said, but what I will do is I will tell Laddie that I will sponsor you, and I won't put my name in the movie. So he had done me a huge favor. And so after I had written that, he came to me and said, we're in a hole with Return of the Jedi, will you come in? And I said, absolutely.
And Kevin, it would have been cool if you had done Body Heat, because there was one, for a number of reasons, but there was one line that I think anyone would have gotten a huge kick out of saying. And I think for people who either, they need a refresher on Body Heat, I think it's sort of film noir without the having to operate under the censorship of when film noir was actually common. And so the one iconic line, I mean, there are many lines there, but one of the most iconic, hey lady, you want to fuck? Remember, he walks up to, he thinks it's Kathleen Turner. Do you remember
I
that?
never sold the film. I resent, when I'm not cast in something.
You know what's
No, you said that line? Bill?
Yeah.
Oh,
he
cool.
thinks it's Kathleen Turner, and it turns out to be the neighbor.
Oh, yeah. I just have to watch it.
When I auditioned Kevin, we came up to that line. He was incapable of doing it. That's why Bill got it.
Right. Oh, I see. I noticed that. But Silverado, you were back, and this was 2 years after Big Show. and it's a very different kind of a movie. We're going into another genre that is not particularly vibrant these days, but that I know have always been fascinated with. And so, both of you, how did this one come together?
Well, at that point, I really did. I was totally taken with Kevin, and when we finished the big show, I wanted to do. I sat down with my brother, who had always loved Western. We used to play cowboys when we were kids, and we wrote a Western. Since I'd cut Kevin Costner out of the big show, I wrote the one part for him. And I always had Kevin Kline in mind for the main character, because I thought that Kevin would make a great cowboy. It turned out he was an incredible rider. If you look at the movie, you'll see how easy he is with the horses and how well he handles the guns, and he looks good in a beard. And, so he was always the guy I wanted to do that.
And then I guess it was William Hurt's turn again with Accidental Tourist, and that one again for Best Picture, Best Screenplay, all these tremendous recognition. But in this case, it was not an original screenplay. It was obviously a very acclaimed book, and just wonder what in that case made you say, "Look, I want to go and tackle that kind of thing," as opposed to what you'd typically done up to that point, which was your own stuff.
Right. That was the first time I adapted a book, but. I had been working on another project written by a very good writer that was about a very straight-laced woman who originally was going to be Diane Keaton, and a crazy dog trainer man who was going to be Jack Nicholson. And that was a very good script called Man Trouble, written by Carol Eastman, who wrote some wonderful movies, including The Fortune Cookie and 5 Easy Pieces. And we worked on it for a long time, and those two actors were no longer in it, and I was going to do it with Jessica Lange and Robert De Niro. And we couldn't get the script right, and the producer said, "Nah, I give up, we're backing out." And at that very moment, I got sent The Accidental Tourist, which was about a crazy female dog trainer and a very straight-laced man. And I thought, this is really weird that I'm getting this. And the script had been written by Frank Galati, who's a wonderful director from Steppenwolf. And the script I thought needed to be worked a little bit, but it was wonderful stuff, and it was based on one of my favorite novels. I mean, Ann Tyler, amazing writer. And I went to see Ann Tyler in Baltimore, and I was crazy about her, and she drove me around all the locations, and I thought, I have to make this movie.
And I guess, was that at that point, were you a dog guy at that point, or because obviously just tying it in with Darling Companion, it's interesting, another charismatic dog, Edward.
There's a big dog part in that, but I like dogs.
Okay, so I think the next one I want to ask you about, I really think is one of the most underappreciated movies of the 90s, especially going back and revisiting it. Not that people don't think it's great, but that I don't think it's given as much credit as it deserves, which is Grand Canyon. And just watching it again, it came out at such an interesting time, too. Right after the Rodney King incident, but before the race riots of 1992. And in the same year in which other movies were dealing with somewhat similar subject matter, but in very different ways. There was Jungle Fever, there was Boys in the Hood, there was, 2 years earlier, there had been Do the Right Thing. But I think what you did with that, I'd love to hear just how you felt about tackling that subject matter at that time. It was a hot button issue. Not that it's not still, but really at that time.
Again, it had to do with my wife and our endless marriage. We had raised 2 boys in Los Angeles, and we're still raising them. And we were then, now they're pretty much raised. We were very struck by what was happening in the city. We were upset by it. We were interested in it. I had loved Los Angeles when we moved there, and I felt that it had changed. It had become so that you had to be very careful where you went. It hasn't changed back. I mean, it's still like that. It had become several different cities within the city in which the whole idea of a city, which was a place where people come together and you can move freely and you can meet interesting people of other origins and everything. That had been perverted into this, a lot of hostility, a lot of violence. And we wanted to write about that thing. What had happened to the city, what it was like to raise a child there, what were the various experiences of a lot of different kind of people in the city at that time. And for the protagonist, I thought of Kevin.
And I guess because for literally about 20 years, that was the you had this run of working so often together up to that point, and then there was this hiatus until Darling Companion. I just want to ask you, I'd asked Kevin the same sort of thing about what was neat about working as an actor with you. I want to ask you, what makes him such a great actor? I mean, he is, but from your point of view, having worked with him more times, I guess, than... Have you worked with another director more often than him?
No.
He's done everything, and his other movies, I'm a huge fan of his other movies. I'm a huge fan of Fish Called Wanda and Sophie's Choice, and I mean, he's made a lot of great movies. And I've seen him do amazing things on stage. He's probably our greatest stage actor. And I just have felt that he can do anything. He could be this cowboy but mainly, there's no question, he's played this sort of glue at the center of these movies that are generally ensemble movies, and I think he does that beautifully. And in Darling Companion, what I love, the character's a bit of a self-absorbed guy and a bit pompous, and those things are easy for Kevin. And yet you don't, I think you don't hate him at all. You still have
And my last question before we invite a few from the audience is just for Kevin. 20 years after previously working with him, you re-teamed for Darling Companion. Had anything changed, or did you step right back into it? And just what do you expect as, you know, this is looking back on, I guess at this point, approximately what your first film was, how many years ago now, I guess, with the first one you directed was now 31 years ago. What should we expect over the next 31 years from Lawrence?
That's up to Lawrence. He's got to write it. I'll do it. If he writes it, I'll do it. I just made one film, Sophie's Choice, before I did The Big Chill. So I was just starting out, and it was just an amazing experience because I was working with a director. I was really spoiled from that experience because Larry loves actors. He trusts actors. You don't arrive on the set and he says, okay, here's what you're thinking, and I'd like you to do this. He lets you do it. He lets you interpret what he's written. And parenthetically, I must add that I didn't know Big Chill was a comedy when I read it either. and I didn't know, frankly, that Darling Companion was a comedy when I read it. I was delighted to hear that it was when Larry told me. And I think it's key to why Larry's writing is so brilliant. You don't see the comedy on the page. You see that could be funny or that could be tragic, because he writes this, his voice and Meg's voice when they write together is this, it's hard to see on a page because it's comedy that doesn't reach out and say, hey, laugh, 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 or not funny, and with buttons and gag lines. It's real people. And so it's and just the way he trusts actors and loves actors and lets you go until you run off the road, and he kind of brings you back. But he sort of edits you. But basically, it's just a vibe that he gives off of trust and love, and we all just flourish that way. So I would do anything for Larry.
Let's go to the audience. Anybody? Yes, sir.
You obviously like many genres of film. What was it about Body Heat that made you want to make that your directorial debut? Such a sexy, provocative movie right out of the gate.
I was afraid that I would never get another chance to direct. You know, it's my first chance. I didn't know there would be a second chance. And I loved film noir. And what I loved about it was it gave you license to do very Baroque kind of things. The dialogue could be very stylized. It's not naturalistic dialogue at all. It's the kind of thing that Scott was talking about. And I thought, this will let me have a lot of fun writing the dialogue, and I can try everything with the camera that I could afford on my limited budget. And this would just be, if I never get a chance to direct again, I want this to have been pretty much everything I wanted to do. And so noir gave you enormous license to be very stylized and to have this sort of extreme behavior and language.
Yes, ma'am. Yep. Yep.
Mine is kind of a two-part question. One, you said you had been writing screenplays while you were at U of M, and then when you started selling them, did on your IMDb it says Empire Strikes Back was your first film, but what was really the first screenplay you sold, and was it ever made?
The first screenplay I sold was made, but it wasn't made for another 12, 14 years, and that was The Bodyguard. And I didn't direct that, but I had sold it. I had written it in 1975, which is now like Neanderthal. But it's still going amazing that there's going to be a musical of it next year in London, and they're working on a remake of it as a movie too. It would be very different, but it just doesn't seem to go away. And that was, but Meg typed that. I mean, I couldn't type at all, and until word processing came in, I had to handwrite everything, and I wrote all the script in longhand. And then Meg typed that up in 1975, and I tried to sell it. So that movie, which continues to have some kind of life, eventually got made. And when we were working on Silverado, Kevin Costner said to me, "I want to be in The Bodyguard. I read that script. I love that script." And I said, "Well, all you got to do is become a big movie star, and you can be The Bodyguard." And he went out and became a huge.
And it was originally for Steve McQueen, though,
It
right?
was for Steve McQueen and Barbra Streisand, and then wound up being Kevin and Whitney Houston, and that was very much Kevin's idea of Whitney Houston. And the movie, I was not happy with the way the movie turned out. We hired a director, and it was our fault. I mean, he's a very talented guy, but something didn't really click. And we struggled through the editing, and there was a lot of unhappiness. And then the movie went out, and just all over the world, people liked that movie. And it may have been just that one song, I don't know.
Yes, but
Okay, just want to say, I saw your film, The Big Show, when I was a teenager, and it really opened my eyes to many things. But the soundtrack was such a huge impression, and I wondered, when you were writing the movie, did you have a lot of those classic songs for those scenes in your head, or how did that
We
work?
did. Yes, but I turned to Meg again, as I always do, and I said, "Look, you know that we shared a musical taste, and we had a bunch of favorites." I said, "I want you to do the job of compiling all these songs that we like from this time when we were in school, and then we're going to go through and we're going to cull it, and we're going to see what works in the movie." And Meg is credited at the end of the movie, is the musical consultant on the movie, and she did all that selection. And Carol Littleton, who actually has cut 9 of my movies, and I would go through and we'd try various things at different places, and we did choose. You can't always get what you want before shooting, because that's part of the movie, you know, but most of the other stuff came in the editing process, but it was all from a catalog that Meg had created.
did it cost $1 zillion to get the rights to all these
No,
songs?
and luckily this was pre
Yeah.
that. After that soundtrack album has sold 7 million copies, and that the fact that that kind of money has raised the prices, and the money we spent. Darling Companion was made for $5 million, and so it was a real struggle to afford anything, and the prices are astronomical now, and luckily Bonnie Raitt, who we approached for a song in Darling Companion, we showed her the clip, and she said, "Oh, well, I like your movies, and I'll give you a break." And she did. We would never have been able to afford.
Interesting.
You can't afford anything now. It's incredibly expensive. That we could never put that soundtrack together now.
I think we have time for 2 quick last questions. We'll go up front, Van, and then we'll go elsewhere. Yeah, we'll come over here. Yep, 1 and 2. But if you go ahead.
Thank you for sharing your brilliance in films and stage with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
My question is, how about a Big Chill 2?
The question is, how about a Big Chill 2? A reunion?
We played last night.
Yeah.
In a way, Big Chill, Grand Canyon, and Darling Companion are a kind of trilogy. In a way, it's a generational, and you see us in Big Chill, rather young and attractive, and in Grand Canyon, approaching middle age, and attractive, and then as aging a bit, and yet still attractive. Darling Companion.
Absolutely.
We told a friend, we were talking this summer with a friend, and I said, well, Darling Companion, it's really about middle-aged people, and he said, buddy, you are not middle-aged. But what's the alternative? What are you going to call it? Late youth.
Well, in a few more years, we'll have to keep updating it. That'll be fun. And then our last question right here.
Well, my question is for Kevin Kline. You were fantastic in Sophie's Choice, in many of your films, but that one in particular. And I can't help but remember that Sophie's Choice was the last time that Meryl Streep, who's been nominated 17 times, has ever won an Academy Award. So what I want to know is, did that a lot have to do with your performance?
I'm so glad you asked.
Did Meryl
For those who
Streep-
didn't hear, that's a good
Just to
question.
read
I
it.
haven't told you that, but the question is Meryl Streep a big fake? And it's really just Kevin Kline.
I held her hand through that whole process. I said, "You've got to do a Polish accent." She didn't want to do it. It was such a privilege to watch her do that.
You did work so fantastically together.
Yeah, no, she was extraordinary. That was my first film, and she held my hand and guided me. And in fact, when I called her when I was offered the Big Chill, she said, "What's it about?" And I just gave her sort of a one sentence. She said, "Don't do it. Do it. And don't prepare so much," because I would come in having been up all night and just wired and crazy and trying to actually embody a paranoid schizophrenic, which the character was, which was fruitless. But what's my point? Oh, yes, I helped her get that Oscar. No, I wish I could claim any.
But have you remained friendly with her?
Yes, and we've worked together several times on stage, and we didn't do another film until the Robert Altman directed a film that we were both in. We just sort of glanced at each other. But we have done Mother Courage on stage, and we did The Seagull, Chekhov's play, together. And we're still in touch.
I think if she wins this year, she should thank you.
She should thank me this year. I'm counting on that. I'd like to hear that. Because I really gave her start.
Well, thank you guys very, very much for coming together. Thank you.